Hi, everyone. All right. Well, that just gave everyone a little time to get started, right? All right. Well, welcome to Weaving 101, where we're going to be talking a little bit about EPI, PPI, and what's it all about doesn't really matter. It really does matter. So in this case, yarn size matters as well as the size reed that you use to get whatever it is that you're trying to make. I have my little housekeeping here. I already said if I cannot answer your comments live, I will get back to you later. And let's see. Okay. Oh, the other thing too, last time I did this, I had someone who was knowledgeable in weaving and they were able to answer some questions in the comments. So if you are someone like that, please go ahead and type in your responses and help everybody else out, because maybe I'm saying something one way, but perhaps you might be able to clarify it. And I hope I don't overwhelm people tonight. But anyway, all right, so EPI, ends per inch. PPI, picks per inch. You might have heard those terms, not sure what they are. I always think about sheets. When you used to buy the sheets, they used to tell you that 800 count, 900 count, or whatever. That's all those little threads that are in the sheets to make it really, really fine and really soft. And that's one way that I think about it. Some other letters that you might hear in weaving are DPI, dents per inch. You might also hear WPI, wraps per inch. I think knitters use that as well. And we also talk about the set. And all these things, if they aren't correct, you're not going to get what you think you're going to get. I'm going to tell you a little story about my first weaving, and it was a long time ago before I even thought about weaving. And I'm going to date myself a little bit. If anyone here remembers a catalog called Leeward's Catalog, I used to do a lot of embroidery, order the pillowcases and do the embroidery. And they had this loom. Apparently it was a rigid heddle loom. I had no idea what it was. I ordered it, got it together, put it together, but I really didn't do a whole lot with yarn. I had a little bit of acrylic yarn because I did some crocheting. So I used some string, yes, some regular string, and I have no idea what the ends per inch were on that. I just put string in, in the slot, in the hole, and whatever. And then I took the acrylic yarn and I started trying to weave with it. And it all got mushed up together. And actually, now I realize it was probably tapestry weaving that I was doing. That's not what I was thinking I was going to do. So if you're experiencing anything like that, that's what we're here tonight or this afternoon, depending where you are, to kind of chat a little bit about. So let's refresh my screen here and move on down here again. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk, whoops, I do have to mute myself or you will hear me echoing. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about knitting and weaving, because I'm guessing that a lot of you are knitting and crocheting maybe we started as knitters or crocheters. So let me check out my basket here, and we're going to talk a little bit about knitting because I want to compare that. Most of the time when you're knitting something and you're finished, it's very stretchy. Okay. The other thing about knitting is that it's one continuous strand, even crocheting, right? It's one strand, and let's see what other attributes there are. You need different needles, right? We have these big needles. Sometimes you have small needles. Sometimes you have larger hooks. Sometimes you have small hooks. I'd like to compare this now, in a minute, to weaving. When you're going to knit something with these, you're going to use heavy yarn. With weaving, the reed also will help you with heavier yarn. If you're going to crochet something with this tiny hook, you might pick something like this. And this is lace weight. That's another thing that's really confusing, I think. Knitting and weaving use different terms. Knitting uses lace weight, DK weight, bulky yarn, and then all of a sudden you go into weaving and we have these weird numbers, 10-2, 5-2, 8-4, and you have to start to transition those numbers into your weaving. So for example, you would not use these big heavy knitting needles to knit this, or you get loosey-goosey, and that's basically what could happen in your weaving. Well, we just lost something there. I'm not sure what I dropped, but I dropped something. All right, so the other thing with knitting, when you're knitting something, I know this is just one of those dishcloths. Normally you wet it and you block it maybe if there's a sweater, and you can stretch it. Can't do that in weaving. So that's one thing there. The other thing, if you're not sure about what to use, a lot of times on the ball of yarn, they tell you things like, oh, recommendation is size 5 knitting needles and a gauge. Well, you can knit a gauge, like, let's say I'm knitting a gauge here, and I'm like, you know what? It's not working out. So what do? You rip it out. You can even take a whole sweater and rip it out, roll it up again, and start all over again. You can't really do that quite as easily with weaving. So let me go on to a piece of woven fabric. And let's talk about weaving a little bit. So weaving, first of all, doesn't stretch. Now, of course, someone's going to tell me, sure, if you go in the bias, it stretches. But most of the time, it doesn't stretch a lot. And there's 2 threads, let's say. Let's say there's threads going one direction and the other direction. So there's 2 sets of threads. So you have that ready. And you have to use charts for your gauge to figure out, we have all these charts here, I'll share a little bit with those later. You have things like yards per pound, and then it tells you, oh, let's say you have some yarn, it's 5/2, and it goes over here and it says, oh, 12 to 18 set. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? 12, or do I use 18? What am I gonna do? So I'm going to be, again, sharing information. It might be overwhelming, but at least give you a little idea of what might go wrong and how to make it go better the next time. The other thing with weaving, let's say I did make a mistake. Well, I could start to unravel it. It's even harder to unravel because this has been washed. So basically what happens is I have a whole lot of little threads there. I have this piece of thread that I could probably use over again if I wanted to, but what about these threads? They're all individual threads. I could just pull one of these out. What am I going to do with all of these? Tie them together and use them again? So you do have to do a little planning and sampling. Now, sampling, I hear a lot about like, oh, I don't want to sample, I just want to weave something. Well, you can kind of sample and weave at the same time, but that's a whole other lesson in itself. So anyway, that's the introduction, the difference between the weaving and knitting that some of you probably already know about, but maybe some of you haven't thought about. So you do need a little more planning time, and you do need to decide different reeds. Now with rigid heddle reeds, you have all different sizes. I think this is a 4 DPI, or 4. This one might be an 8. And then if you have other looms like table looms, you might have 1, and this one is 8. So it's kind of like, okay, now wait a minute. I got all these different sizes here, but with this reed, I can do more. So that's one difference between rigid heddle weaving and floor loom or table weaving that have this kind of reeds in them. So that's just think of that. So when you are doing something with your rigid heddle loom, and you want to use very, very thick yarn, like for this example would be maybe some hand spun yarn, you do need this reed. You can't use this reed, otherwise it's going to all squish together and not be quite as soft. Just keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. All right. Yes, longer learning curve, and you really have to decide the purpose of your cloth. Do you want it to be nice and soft, so you can wear a scarf? Or do you want it kind of stiff for a placemat? Or maybe you want to use something for a small tapestry that you're going to maybe put in the back of a jacket or something. You want that to be fairly firm. So you have to think about what it is. And what I'm going to do, my plan is to go over 4 kinds of weave structures. And the 4 kinds are tabby weaving, twill weaving, weft-faced, and warp-faced. So if you're going, okay, thanks a lot, you've already told me too much. Well, let's go slow and look at one at a time. The first thing I'm going to look at is kind of what I'm wearing, my scarf here. And since I have a lot of people here, I believe, who have farms and have wool, I thought I'd start with a wool piece. This was part of a shawl coat that I made. It's mostly wool, or mostly commercial wool, and this is hand spun wool. Now, one thing usually when you're weaving, you get yarn on cones. Now, I did send this out to a mill, a friend of mine a couple years ago. We sent a whole lot of yarn to a mill. I had some put on cones to weave with and some in skeins to knit with. So this was my yarn. Now, I got the yarn, and how in the world do I know what's the set? What EPI? How do you determine all these things? Well, unfortunately, you can't just look inside for the label. You could maybe go, if it was a yarn that you bought on a store, from a store on the internet, sometimes you go in and they actually tell you. They give you the yardage, and that's something else. In weaving, I think of yards in pounds, and I think in knitting, many people think of ounces. So you have to do a little more math, basic math, so you don't want to get too frustrated. But if you go online, sometimes a cone of yarn you purchase, maybe not this one, they might tell you, oh, set that at 12 ends per inch or 15 ends per inch. Again, you have to decide how you're going to do that. Is that what you want for that fabric? And in this case, this one, I believe they told me is about 900 yards in a pound. And so what I did is I went to one of these charts. Yeah, now this one is from the Woolery. And they have a nice thing about cotton. They give you wool, and they also give you linen and other. The reason you might want to look for something like this is that this tells me that if it's very heavy wool that I have here, because they give you the yardage, 1,600 yards per pound, and I think I said this was 12, it might have even been more. They suggest a setting at 8 to 16 ends per inch. So I have to look at that. Then I have to look for my reed to see if it fits. I know, you're going, thanks a lot. Well, this one is a tabby weave. Tabby means plain weave, and it's what they would call a balanced weave. Balanced weave means that in the loom, it was 8 ends per inch, and when I wove it, it was close to 8 ends per inch. So you get this nice, very balanced weave, and with tabby, you can see the threads going both ways. That's one important thing to think about. But do you always have to use the same yarn in the warp as the weft? Not always. Oh, I know. Another thing out there to throw at you. I really recommend, though, that people look at patterns and check things out. And if you have a lot of one fiber, like wool, keep weaving with it over and over again, and that's your sampling. You can get a feel for it. You can see what happens. Oh, and I forgot the other thing about weaving. It shrinks. So maybe I wanted this to be, I'm not sure if this is 24 inches wide, but maybe I thought it was going to be 28, and I put it in the loom, and of course what happens? It shrinks. Not only does it shrink this direction, it shrinks the other way. So that's another factor. I can't just, like knitting, get another skein of yarn and add something onto it. Once you have it on the loom, unless you want to redo it all over again, you can't really add any extra yarn if you get to the end. Again, a little more planning involved, a whole other lesson in itself. So let's take a look at some hand spun yarn. Now this one, I'm going to start piling things over here on the side. Now this one, I don't know if you've seen it before, but I used it a while ago. This is hand spun yarn that I believe I wove in a rigid heddle loom. And I have a little note here. This was set at 8 ends per inch, and it was woven, the picks per inch were 8 also. Again, how did I know? It's hand spun yarn. I figured out the yardage. And I know some of you do that when you're, you can take your nitty notty or you can take a skein winder and you can figure out approximately. So sometimes you have to kind of play around with it and kind of guess. And I think one of the beginning mistakes I also made was I set things too tight and it was really, really stiff. So one of two things happen. Sometimes people set things too wide or they set them too close together when you're learning. And again, just starting to play around with that and trying to come up with what's going to happen, or again, read some instructions. So with this one, we did it both ways, but you don't always have to do that. This is another scarf. And what I like about this one is that in the warp, it was 10 ends per inch because I spun it a little tighter, a little smaller. But I wanted all this to show, all those pretty colors to show. So I got some, I guess you'd call this lace weight. It's a wool intense silk, and I wove with the finer yarn. It gives it a little bit softer feel to it. And you have to, the other thing is with weaving is the beat. If I beat it really hard, it's also going to get stiffer. So you have a couple things, but you can mix and match things. So in this case, what happens though, this one was 10 ends per inch in the loom, in the warp, and the weft ended up being 14. Typically, when you're weaving kind of a balanced weave, your warp, if it's 10, it's usually the weft, the picks per inch are usually 8 or a little less. If you look at some magazines and articles, and they'll give you those numbers on there, and you'll see that one is a little less than the other. And basically what you do is you take a ruler and they measure to see how many times they went back and forth in the loom to measure that, to give you that gauge. And then what actually happens is you need a little less yarn for your weaving normally, but not in this case. Have to throw some exceptions out there. So these are wool examples. Put those in this basket here. And with those, like I said, I'd probably use dents of reeds like this, you know, heavier dent. And let me see if I have an 8 dent reed here. Don't think I do. Yeah, 8 here. All right, so this is an 8. And if I was going to do the 8, I would do all of them. Let's say I only have this one and I want to go 6 ends per inch. There's a chart for that. Of course there's a chart for everything. Now this one came from Needles of Steel, and it's a reed substitution chart. I like this one because it has different shading for each line. What the heck is a reed substitution chart? Well, I do explain that other times, but right now I have this one. This is, let me see, let me make sure. This is an 8 dent. If I would put my ruler down, there's 8 slots for an inch. That's all I have. So I'm going to go to the chart and I'm going to go down. And if I want to do 6, they give me these funny numbers, 0, 1, 1, 1. Well, it means that I can go 0, skip this one, and go 1, 2, 3, skip 1, 1, 2, 3, and I will have the set that I need to match my yarn. Now, if I have a lot thinner yarn, I could put 2. If it says to do 16, I could put 2 in every one. Now, but you cannot do that with rigid heddle looms. You do need a lot of different size heddles for that. And if I recall, and maybe someone can tell me I'm wrong, I believe the finest heddle for rigid heddle is a 15 dent reed. So if you're going to weave some thin yarn, this is the thinnest you can do, which in my mind is about a 5/2 weight yarn. Maybe a fingering weight, a little bit heavier than that. Again, my opinion. So that's something else to keep in mind. So let's look at some more tabby weave and compare it to twill. So here we have some tabby. Let me do it this way. This is some nice cotton. And this was 3/2 cotton. And I set this at 12 ends per inch. And what happened was when I wove back and forth, it was only 10 picks per inch back and forth. Okay, so that's what happened with this one. However, I also did a twill. What's a twill? Look at your blue jeans. Twills are normally, a tabby is over every other thread. This is catching 2, 2, 2. You can start reading. So this is a twill. Now with this one, it was 12 ends per inch, but when I wove back and forth, 14 picks per inch. Because when you're weaving twill, this is a thicker fabric, much thicker, and you're using up more yarn. So if you're weaving, you're going, what happened? I ran out of yarn. I thought I had enough. With this one, sometimes I actually say that in some of the patterns. I say, I'm sure you're going to have enough to do tabby, but I'm not sure if you're going to have enough to do the twill. So that's where that comes into play. Again, shrinkage. The other thing is when you're doing a tabby or plain weave, normally it's pretty wide, and with this one it's shrunk in a little bit more. So you have that draw in also, and that's very typical to have a little bit of draw in. So, and I think these were probably started at 14 and they ended up being about 12 wide. Shrinkage, yeah, and I can't stretch it and make it bigger. Now I have another yarn, it's a heavier cotton. And this one actually came out to be, and this is some really thick yarn, it's kind of like that wool that I had. And this is nice and stiff, and this came out to be 8 and 8. I mean 10 and 10. So there we go on that one. Now, what if you want to do some really, really, really fine weaving? So you have some really thin yarn, comes in a cone like this. This is 8-2 cotton. You might hear that. A lot of weavers, if they're doing towels, they use 8-2 cotton or 10-2 cotton. Again, I believe it's like lace weight. And if I go to my chart here, those of you who are knitters, 8-2 cotton says it's 3,360 yards per pound. So I guess you can divide that up by ounces and come up with how many yards in 4 ounces to help you out. But it'll tell me to set it from anywhere from 16 to 24. Well, the other thing about that 16 to 24, the plain or the tabby weave is usually the smaller number. And if you're going to do a twill or some of those other fancier patterns, that's when you go up to 24. Again, it's the purpose of your fabric. What are you going to make? With tabby weaving, see, what could we make? We could make all sorts of things. I think that's why I like to use it. You can make scarves, you could make tablecloths, you could make clothing, placemats, blankets, all sorts of things. Heavy or thin yarn. It's one of the most versatile weave structures is tabby weave. And you can do a lot with it, again, depending on what you want to make with your fabric. So we have thin, here we go. So this one is set at 20 ends per inch. And when I wove it, picks per inch were 16. And this is an 8-2 cotton. It's nice and soft. It's what you would want to dry your dishes with, or maybe even to a hand towel, something like that, nice and soft. But what if I want it just a little bit heavier? This is the same fabric, and I did the twill on it. It's a little bit heavier, and again, like I said, 20 ends per inch. And this one, and this one was 18. So I went from 16 to 18 picks. Again, it's a little bit heavier fabric. So you have to think about what it is that you want to make. You have those options. The other nice thing about sampling is whatever you're putting on your loom, you could do all sorts of treadling patterns with it. You can try different yarns, see what happens. And that's one fun thing about weaving. Now this is 20 ends per inch. I don't think you could do this on a rigid heddle loom. If you double it, it's not going to make it 20 ends per inch. It's just going to make it a thicker yarn. All right, what else do we have in the basket here? Oh, here's something fun. How about that? This is actually a reed that is 20 ends per inch. Now, I rarely do that. I normally take a 10 and I double it. It just seems a little bit faster for me. But they do make, I think they make them up to 30. I think I've seen them up. But again, just getting your yarn in there. And that's the other test. If you're not sure about something, let's use this one as an example. Let's say you had this big yarn. This is probably what I did when I learned. And I probably put this yarn in a slot and a hole and a slot and a hole. This is like knitting with those big fat knitting needles with this thin yarn. And what's going to happen? Well, let's show you what's going to happen if you do that. You're going to do another kind of weaving. You are going to be doing tapestry weaving. That's what Teddy does, right? And the little looms that she does, and she goes up and down. What is tapestry weaving? Or what I'm going to call it weft-faced. It means that you can't see the warp. All you can do is see the weft. Now let's take a look at my early trial at this. Yeah. As you can see on this one, I did not cover the warp all the time because I wasn't sure what I was doing. I was trying to do some clasp weaving and some other kinds of things. This was, again, a sample that I did. And on here it says I set this at 8 ends per inch, but when I wove, it was almost up to 20 because it all smooshed down. So again, this is a sample of what I was, it's upside down. I was hanging it at one point in time. So this was one of my earlier trying to do a little tapestry weaving. Now let's see what happens after a while. And with tapestry weaving, normally you use something a little stronger or some thin yarn. This is some cotton, some nice heavy cotton. Sometimes people use wool, whatever works for you, whatever you have. And then, I got a little bit. So here's another one. This is another tapestry. Ooh, I'm catching that on there. But now I have hidden the warp. So basically it's weft dominant. If you want something like this, what would you do with this? Well, maybe you want a piece for a front of a purse. Maybe you're making a rug. What are some other things that you can do with it? Maybe somebody can add some things. I don't do a lot. I've made rugs that way. Let's see. Mug mats, totes. You could actually do a nice heavy, one of those nice heavy totes out of that. And also maybe some small bags. But most of the time I see people do wall hangings. And this was the last piece that I did. Pretty proud of it. I can't even tell which is the front and the back. So this is another weft-faced. So maybe this is something you're doing. Now maybe you got this and you didn't expect to get it. What happened was the ends per inch and the yarn you used covered up all of the warp. And that wasn't what you were expecting. Again, that happened to me. I can identify with that. It might be happening to you. So you need to plan ahead unless this is something you really want to happen. You want that to happen. And now there's one other kind. Oh, and with this you can use, I have all kinds of, got my basket here. I have some wool, I use some hand spun. It's really a lot of fun to use yarn and even some acrylic that really, I call it smushes down. And this is where you can use some of your knitting. And it's a quick thing to do. The other thing with tapestry weaving, it's very quick to warp the loom, so if you want immediate gratification, but the weaving takes a little longer, and you have a lot of creativity, maybe little pictures you can do and other kinds of things, and you can add them. Like I said, you could take that little piece, and I know Teddy was making boxes. Someone I know took a piece and they put it like on the back of a jacket. So you have other ways that you can use that, and they're very small. So if that's the kind of weaving you want to do, you can give that a try. And there's one other kind of weaving that I like to do. This is what I would call band weaving. Hang on a minute. All right. So this is ankle weaving, but I actually do it on my Richard Heddle loom. So what we have here is a lot of fun. This is what you would call warp-faced. It means that the warp is all hidden. You cannot, weft, it's warp-faced because the weft is hidden. This is a better example of that. You can kind of see the turquoise, but what I did was I wove with black, and you can't see the black except where the black is and where the lines were. So this is another one. It's a lot of fun to do. It can be a quick weave, but what happens with the warp-faced, this was about 34 ends per inch, and the picks were about 8 to 10. So you have all these threads. And this is where you can see a little bit better. You can actually see all of them. So they kind of come all spread out all that. This one was almost 48 ends per inch and 10 picks per inch. So warping the loom might take a little longer, but you're weaving, you get these nice bands. So you could make dog collars, leashes, belts, some other things over here. Anything you can think of with the bands you could do. And you can do it on an ankle loom. You can even do this on a table loom or a floor loom. Just have to remember you're smushing everything together. So if this is the effect you're looking for, you can do this. Now this is often with some yarn that's called 5-2-3-2. It's kind of a pearl cotton. So many cottons and so many wools out there to try to experiment with. But like I said, it's always a good idea to work with some yarn, maybe the same kind of yarn over and over again. If you do one project with one yarn and then you skip and you switch to another yarn too quickly, you haven't gotten the feel and what's going to happen with the yarn. Now the other thing with this one, it's not going to shrink as much, and neither will tapestry once you weave it. That's one difference between weaving the balanced weaves and the twill weaves. They're going to shrink it a little bit. These normally, after you're done, pretty much stay the sizing where they're at. I also made guitar straps with those too. So, those are all the different kinds of weave structures that I can think of right now that I'm going to share with you. There's a lot more out there, but again, it takes a lot of experimentation, A lot of just testing things out. So I'm going to see if I can actually see any questions or comments that people have. This is where I start to look for something and I cannot find it because it doesn't show up the way that I thought it was going to. I will try to refresh this one here, see if I can get any of it, but maybe not. All right, I am going to, nope, that is not going to work. Unfortunately, I keep losing the connection. Oh, sorry about that, I hear that. All right, I can see some people here. I see 15 comments. Let's see if I can see all of them. Nope, I don't want that. All right. Okay, well, for some reason, me and technology right now, I cannot see all the comments here, but hang on a minute. Hang on, let's see. Oh, wait a minute. All right. Okay, I'm back at the beginning. All right, I see Joy. Yeah, Lee Wards. I did date myself on that one. All right. What weave structure is my tablecloth? Oh, this tablecloth? This is a twill. And this is probably, this is one of those, one I got at the, I don't know, Walmart or somewhere. It's what I use for my booths. And it is, it's probably, looks like a turned twill. How do you like that? Can look at it, look at those and I can tell you. And it's probably woven with something like the size of thread. So if you want to try to weave with thread, and I know some of my friends do, I don't think I'd want to do anything more than a bookmark if I was weaving with thread, that's for sure. What I'm doing here on WAFA will be is recorded, and you can watch it later. The other goal that I have is that I'm going to start to, they're only on for, I schedule them for about 30 days. Then what I'm going to start doing is downloading the ones that I do live, and I'm going to put them on my YT channel and a separate section saying WAFA live videos or something like that. I'll probably, I don't know if I'll edit them at all. I think I'll just leave them on there and then people can find them that way. So if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Or any questions, I'm sorry. Okay, another one here. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm going to say goodbye for now, and I hope I didn't burn your brain out tonight, giving you some information. But if you have any specific questions, please feel free to send me a private message. I love helping people. I don't want to have people stop weaving because it took too long, but you do need to do a little more planning and really look at those charts out there and, and do what they tell you to do. Thank you so much for watching, and I will do something again next month. If you have any ideas or any suggestions, send them to me and I will decide what I'm going to do. So my plan is at least once a month, normally on a Tuesday, and I'm going to try to pick this time as long as it hasn't been picked by someone else. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day or rest of your evening, wherever you are.